Ready.
Okay, welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, September 5th, 2012. Roll call, please.
Planning Commissioners Astorian.
Here.
Lee. Yesayan. Here. Chairperson Landrigan. Chairperson Pro Tem Sheets.
Here. Okay, the report, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, August 29th, 2012, on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website.
Thank you. Okay, if everybody join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the next item is approval of the minutes from August 22nd.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Oh, second.
The minutes have been approved and seconded. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so the minutes have been approved. Next item is oral communications, and I think this is for the agenda item, so we have nothing for oral communications. The zoning appeals, none. Old business, none. New business, we have an item 7B. What's the status with that?
Yeah, Chairman Sheets, members of the Planning Commission, we have a request that this item be continued to October 3rd, 2012, without further notice.
So moved.
Second.
Take roll call. Roll call on that, please.
Planning Commissioner.
Yes.
Planning Commissioner.
Aye.
Chairperson Pro Tem Sheets.
Aye. Okay, we'll move to the next item, which is item 2, proposed ordinance to establish North Cumberland Heights Historic District. Location, we need to read all of those.
I'll show you a
I
map.
think we're going to cover them all anyway, so we have Jay Platt here, the planner extraordinaire for our historic
Yes.
districts, and
Change my
we'll change your
card,
name
so,
tag.
yeah.
All right, so we'll take your report, Jay.
Thank you. This is the 5th historic district that the Planning Commission will have been considering. 4 of those have been designated so far, so you guys are on track in terms of trying to help neighbors in Glendale preserve their neighborhoods. I think it's important to remember that historic districting in Glendale is driven from the neighborhoods, from the community. It's not a top-down process. We wait until we have people in our neighborhoods come to us and say, we're interested in helping preserve the character of the area we live in. So far, all of our historic districts have been residential, but that doesn't mean that they have to be. Our historic district ordinance would allow any type of mix of building types or uses to become a historic district. So the district in question today is the North Cumberland Heights District, which you can see on this map. It consists of 179 properties, all of which are single-family homes in northwest Glendale in the Cumberland Heights neighborhood. And pretty much everything north of Cumberland between Grandview and where Mountain kind of hugs the foothill there, it would be included in this district. Going back several years to around 2004, you might remember that there was an effort to designate a much larger Cumberland Heights Historic District that was over 500 properties. That did not work out because at that point we didn't have an ordinance that reflected kind of the needs of the community, and we also didn't have historic district guidelines, which give people some certainty about what's going to happen once a district is designated in terms of what type of regulatory oversight we have of their properties. Since that date, we have developed both an ordinance and a set of award-winning design guidelines. And in the 4 existing historic districts, we see that the guidelines have been working well for projects that are coming before us. What this map shows is the North Cumberland Heights section in the northern portion of the neighborhood, and the gray outline shows the extent of the original proposal for Cumberland Heights, and then this dashed outline shows the 87 properties in the Ardeven Highlands Historic District, which was designated in early 2009. So slowly, this area, if other neighbors come forward with historic district applications, may actually meet the original borders proposed for Cumberland Heights. The process that we've developed through the new historic district ordinance is very open, very transparent, and incorporates a lot of public input. We're at the very end of the process, practically, with the Planning Commission hearing. The final step will be City Council, which makes the final determination, and the Planning Commission's vote is advisory to Council on this. You can see each of the boxes that are highlighted in blue represent opportunities for public testimony, public comment, and public participation in various meetings. To date, we haven't had any organized opposition to the North Cumberland Heights Historic District, and in fact, we've had significant support from the community, which I'll get to in a minute. Just to talk about the development history a little bit, you can see that most of this area that I'm circling here is in the North Cumberland Heights District, and it has a different developmental pattern than Rossmoyne, for example, which you reviewed a number of months ago, where Rossmoyne was laid out by one developer and subdivided at the same time. The entire Cumberland Heights and, in fact, northwest Glendale area was divided in a more piecemeal fashion. So there's no one developer who we can say came up with the concept of how North Cumberland Heights looks. But in fact, once we did the research, we recognized that Dan Campbell and his brother Arthur, who were associates of Leslie Brand and Dan Campbell lived in the Ardeven house that you're probably familiar with. They were involved in almost all of the real estate transactions. This was their land, which had been agricultural land previously that they ended up subdividing. And because all of that subdivision happened around the same time, we have a lot of consistency. So most of the houses that we see have similar setbacks, have similar lots. Well, there are various lot sizes, but there's definitely a consistency and continuity that we look for in a historic district that this neighborhood meets. Just to show you, with Ardeven Highlands, it was the same developmental pattern. Tract here, tract there, most of which were associated with the Campbells in one way or another. The neighborhood is rich in architectural resources that reflect the period revival styles of the 20s and 30s. So we have really nice examples of Spanish, especially Spanish colonial, but also Mediterranean revival, Monterey revival, American colonial revival, English Tudor, French eclectic. And then the neighborhood kept developing. So it began its development around 1923, but it kept developing up until the 50s. There were still open lots in World War II era, and then those got filled in by the early 50s. And so we can say that the end of the era of building and construction in the neighborhood was 1953, more or less. There are 3 houses that have significant residents, so this area has always been attractive to prominent people in Glendale and regional, and, if you're a baseball fan, perhaps American or even world history. Here's Casey Stengel's house on Grandview Avenue, which is not designated, but would be eligible, we believe, because of its association with Casey Stengel, who lived there for the greater part of his career. Even though he was working in New York a lot, he was always coming back to Glendale. The Jensen House was built by Robert Jensen, who was the son of the founder of the Jensen Theater Empire. They were the builders of the Grand Avenue, or the Grand Theater, Palace Grand Theater on Brand Boulevard, the Egyptian Cafe and the Palace Grand Shops. They also did a number of other theaters and recreational centers throughout the LA area. So definitely a significant figure, and this house is on the Glendale Register. It's at the top of Grandview, right before you get to the Brand Library gates. And then finally, a house that a lot of people don't know about is the house of Charlotte Armstrong and Ada Thompson. Ada Thompson was Leslie Brand's niece, and the same architect who designed the Brand Library, El Miradero, designed this house, which makes it definitely interesting, and it's definitely the earliest house in the neighborhood. Charlotte Armstrong actually moved into the house in the 50s and 60s, and she was a really well-known mystery writer at the time, but her star has kind of dimmed now. But it was kind of fun doing a little research to find out that she was a very well-respected, award-winning mystery writer living in Glendale. When we brought this to the Historic Preservation Commission, there was concern about the integrity, the physical integrity of the house, because it's been really altered over the years. And as I'll mention in a minute, we divide buildings in historic districts into contributors and non-contributors. The commission felt that this house should probably become a non-contributor because of its physical integrity, even though it does have significant associations. So someone could possibly nominate it for those associations in the future, and it could be individually designated. This change isn't reflected in your staff report or the historic resource survey that you got in your package, but that's been changed, and the new information is up on the website. And so I'll mention in a minute how that affected things. We did conduct an update of the Cumberland Heights survey that was done in 2004. Surveys have about a 5-year shelf life, so we couldn't just reuse that old information. So staff put together an update for the 179 properties where we looked at everything again, we rephotographed everything, we looked at permit records, and we figured out what's changed since 2004. Some houses that had been contributors at that point had been altered enough that we brought them down to non-contributing status, and we made a number of other changes in terms of the designations, the status codes that we give to properties. We also were able to determine that the proposed district meets 5 of the 9 criteria, and the historic district ordinance asks that only 1 of those criteria be met at minimum. I won't read those 5 unless you're interested. And then just to sum everything up in terms of what the survey update determined, the period of significance was found to be 1921 to 1953. Your staff report still has the earlier date from 1913 for the Thompson-Dryden house, or I'm sorry, the Thompson-Armstrong house. But this is actually the accurate period of significance now. The houses are either contributors, meaning they were built within the period of significance and have not been altered dramatically, or they're non-contributors, which means either they're older homes that were severely altered to lose their historic character, or they just happen to be built outside the period of significance, whether it's before or after. When we did the final count, we came up with 140 houses out of 179 that are contributors. That's 78%. The ordinance asks for a 60% minimum, so we're well within the margins of the ordinance, and this is also right in the ballpark of all of the other districts have been coming in with numbers like this in terms of contributor status. And then finally, the most important step for the proponents of a district who do a lot of work, this has been a 2-year process. The proponents go door to door, they do education, they work with their neighbors, they talk to neighbors, and they find out who's interested in this, who would like to support the district, who's not interested in the district, who doesn't want a district. And they're bringing around a petition, basically, where the owners have to sign the petition in order for that property to count as a yes vote toward asking council to become a district. That petition was authorized on March 26th of this year by the Historic Preservation Commission, which said that the survey update was good and sound. And then on August 13th, the proponents brought back signatures. Since that time, we've gotten 2 more signatures. So between the Historic Preservation Commission hearing a few weeks ago and this hearing tonight, we now have 133 out of 179 properties signing on, which means that all owners of the property, if it's a husband and wife situation, the husband and the wife have to sign for us to count that property. If only one signs, we don't count it. So the 133 brings us to 74%, so it actually bumped up a notch from when HPC saw this, when they saw 73%. The ordinance requires 50% minimum for neighborhood support, and so we're well above that and also well within the kind of range that we've seen in the other historic districts. As I mentioned before, there's been no organized opposition to the district. It doesn't mean that everyone supports the district or wants the district, but it's clear from the petition that a strong majority of people are interested in protecting their neighborhood through district status, and then people who don't sign the petition doesn't necessarily mean that they oppose the district. There could be a variety of reasons for people not to have been home or absentee landlords, a bunch of different situations, but there are also people who probably will be saying, no, I don't want this district. So it's important to remember that. But based on the Historic District Overlay Zone Ordinance, this is ready to roll out as a district. If the Planning Commission votes in favor of supporting it, you'll be advising City Council to vote in favor of designation. Once designation occurs, homeowners will look to the Historic Preservation Commission and to the Historic District Guidelines for guidance when they're proposing changes to the property. So what it does is it takes design review authority from Design Review Board and places it with Historic Preservation Commission. And the difference is that the Historic District Guidelines are very focused on historic character and features and styles within the district. So it gives a pretty solid backing for making decisions. And generally, if work that's proposed meets the guidelines, we can write a staff-level permit for that. If it doesn't meet the guidelines, or there are a few other thresholds, if a project exceeds, for example, 200 square feet of new construction at the front of the property, or 700 square feet at the rear of the property, it has to go to the Historic Preservation Commission for review. And what we've tried to do is make that process as close to Design Review Board process as possible. So we use the same thresholds, and the whole application process, the review process, is as much the same as we can make it.
So it goes through Historic Commission and then Design Review?
No, Design Review Board is out of the picture. We don't want to put people in double jeopardy
Right.
where they go through two boards. So instead of going to Design Review Board, HPC looks at it.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for
Okay.
Mr. Platt, you mentioned that Charlotte Armstrong's home at 1700 Grandview was decided by HPC to stay as a non-contributor, so in future they may want to seek to
Because of the association with Armstrong, if someone were to do more research and find out, yes, she's, at this point, we just did some basic research. If we find out, oh, she was quite a figure in her day, comparable to some of the other people associated with our properties, one of the criteria for designation is that there's an association with a significant person. So the architecture is kind of taken out of the picture at that moment, and we can still designate a property for that association. Some people ask, what if someone decided to kind of fix the house, restore it back to what it used to look like? We can't guarantee that that would work, because sometimes when you do that, there's nothing left. You're putting all new materials on a property. But it's still a possibility in a lot of situations, and that happens in other cities fairly often. So in that case, it could become a Glendale Register property for its architecture, because it definitely, you can tell it's an interesting building and an early house, but it also could meet the architecture criterion as well as the person, the significant person criterion for the ordinance.
And who makes that determination? Like, if they go and say, we think, seems like it's a little bit subjective at some point, like, we think this person really was significant, do they bring that to you and then you make a recommendation?
Yeah, the owner would have to come to us. We can't force a designation on an owner. And if the owner came to us, it's subjective the way,
Like a
most
case.
things in the world are.
Yeah.
There's, that's why we have a board or commission that kind of reviews it. And what we would look at is like, what's the level of significance we've seen with some of the other properties in the city, perhaps, and see if her work kind of rises to that level or not. And then there's also the connection with Leslie Brand. We can't say that we know enough about his niece at this point to say how important that connection is. And then there's also Nathaniel Dryden as an architect, who's very important, we know, in terms of the early architectural history of the city. In the case of this house, I've never been on the property, so it's really what we're seeing from the street. We know it's been altered. We have a permit record that says that. But maybe there's enough there that it could still be significant for Dryden's connection.
a contributing asset house property, nothing stops it from, if it qualifies or meets the criteria, to become historic, right?
You mean to be on the Glendale Register?
Right.
Sure. If someone comes to us and says, I think my house has something special, it's different than my other neighbors' houses, which are also beautiful, period revival houses, what happens in a historic district is it kind of raises the bar a little bit. You have to say, why is this house more interesting historically than all the other nice houses in the neighborhood?
And the only reason that this house was not deemed contributing is because of the multitude of changes.
Yeah, we kind of, we were juggling this one. It was originally, in the original survey, they said that it was a contributor, and an idea is that now that we have the design guidelines, we can use those as a basis for assessing what's a contributor and what isn't. And if we see work that we wouldn't be able to approve using the guidelines, it makes it harder for us to continue to say it's a contributor. So we kind of made that assessment in this case.
Thank you.
I just had one other question. Would something like the fact that it's, if not the first house that was built in the area, one of the first houses, would that be something you'd want to put in your case?
Well,
To
we
make
definitely consider it, and we had a case in Cottage Grove, which was one of our early historic districts, where most of the houses were built starting in the early 20s and pretty much done by the end of the 20s. And there was a farmhouse from 1901 in the neighborhood. And at first, I was like, I think we're going to have to call that a non-contributor because it wasn't developed by the Fox brothers who did the neighborhood. It didn't reflect some of the goals that the development had. When we started doing the research with the consultant, we found out that the woman who owned that house owned the tract of land that was sold to the Fox brothers for development. So it kind of brought her story into the development history. And so we were able to call it a contributor. But we were kind of prepared to say that this intact, early, vernacular kind of farmhouse wasn't going to be a contributor. And that's how it works when you do the period of significance. You have to be very careful to say that this is a meaningful period because we're saying that all of these houses are linked historically in one way or another. So you can have some outliers that are beautiful, especially with modern construction. You can have fantastic properties that were just built later than the rest of the district.
Okay, we do have one speaker. Gloria Sander, if you still want to participate, provide your name
Hi,
for the commission.
my name is Gloria Sander, and I am a resident of the proposed area for which we are seeking historical designation. I live on Matilahaw Road. I have been a Glendale resident since 1998, and I'm an art and architectural historian, so I was very interested as I became more aware of my neighborhood and the historical houses and so forth that are there. I've been a long-time supporter of the Brand Library as well, which I'm really looking forward to its renovation. This has been a 2-year process, as Jay mentioned, and he has been very helpful and accommodating to us and shepherding us through this process. And I would say that with 179 homes over 2 years, we had many opportunities for the flames to ebb, but in fact, they never did. People stepped up in terms of having meet and greets to raise the funds that allowed us to pay for the petition process to start. We've always had a large number of volunteers, and we have over 48 people that are just in on the volunteer loop so that they can go out and help us. So we're really grateful that we've come this far, and I want to petition you as well to support this so that it will have your stamp of approval when the City Council addresses it as well. I think this has been a really great conditioning for anyone in Glendale about what it means to be a citizen, about what it means to have pride and learn the rules of your community, how you want to see things develop in the future. And at the very least, it'll certainly be a conditioning for those of us who may eventually be volunteers at the Glendale Historical Society. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you will consider supporting this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, any further comments?
Yeah, well, I just want to say, reading this, Jay, this stuff is always really well written, the historic surveys that you guys do. And one thing I found really interesting with this district was that the variety of homes and how it's not all built by one developer, but it's kind of built by different people over time, which is, I think, different from the other districts, or at least from Rossmoyne. And I thought that was really interesting. And I asked this last time, but I forgot the answer. How do you guys go about funding this, as far as when people come up with and say they want to do a district? Do they come up with the money too, or the city has money allocated for this, or how does that work?
There's an application fee, which doesn't cover the full costs of putting this together. What we have done in the past is generally we hire a historic resource consultant to do the work for creating the historic resource survey and doing the building-by-building survey of the properties. In this case, we decided that since we had a very good survey for Cumberland Heights, and then we also had a survey update done by the same firm for Artivan Highlands, we thought we could take it on at staff level because we had a good model to follow from the previous update, and that's what we decided to do. So this district didn't have an additional cost for the survey. For Rossmoyne, for example, we got a grant from the National Trust for Historic
Oh, that's right.
Preservation that
Yeah.
was about half of the cost of the survey. So we try wherever we can to offset those costs.
Right.
And then the application fee also has risen since some of these earlier districts were nominated.
And it's and this is the fifth. Is this the fifth district in Glendale?
This will be,
Is that what
if
you said?
it's voted in, would be the fifth.
That's great.
And we have one other in the pipeline moving forward.
That's great. No.
I want to kind of echo what Eric says. The process is not only a wonderful process, it gets better every time we do one of these districts. The effort that the Historic Preservation Commission puts into it and the staff is to be commended. And the item that I think is really significant was mentioned and highlighted by the speaker. The volunteer aspect is wonderful. I've heard the same comments from each one of the groups that recommended the previous neighborhoods. So not only do you get people to volunteer, you get the neighborhoods to work together. And they have to roll their sleeves up and do some significant work
Yeah.
and discuss what the issues are and come up with the right items and try to make the case appropriately. So it just, in all levels, it makes them be better citizens, it makes them be a bigger part of their neighborhood, and I think that's really a special part of this process. And I just am impressed at what we're doing with the neighborhoods in our city that we all know are beautiful, but now we're recognizing that and identifying the components that make them that way. So just make those comments. So if we're ready for a motion, I think we can
Yeah, I can,
move forward.
I can make the motion. And I believe it's your Exhibit A, right? The motion that we have.
Yes.
I move that the Planning Commission of the City of Glendale, after having reviewed and considered the material of current record relative to the proposed North Cumberland Heights Historic District Overlay Zone, does hereby recommend to the City Council that the overlay zone be adopted as proposed.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So with the vote of
Okay.
100%, we make it so. So it'll move forward. I'm sure there'll be no difficulty for it to pass at the council. All right. Any comments? Community Development Department updates?
We just have a reminder that the ethics training, if you're interested in attending, is September 18th, or we also have an online version available.
Good. Comments from the commissioners? We've done them. Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Thank you.
And we're adjourned. Thank you.